On the morning of August 19, 1943, 27,000 feet above the German industrial city of Schweinfurt, Oberleutnant Franz Stigler pulled back on the control stick of his Messerschmitt Bf-1 and felt the airframe tremble. The thin air at this height made every movement slow and heavy, turning flying into an act of prediction rather than reaction. Below him, a formation of American B-17 flying fortresses moved eastward, their white contrails crossing the dark ground like streaks of chalk. Stigler had already flown 174 combat missions. He understood the science of air combat as clearly as a pianist knows their keys. Altitude meant energy. Energy meant options, and whoever controlled the sky's height controlled the battle. That was the rule, the physics, the key to survival. Then he saw them. 4 planes climbing up from below. Their twin tails were instantly recognizable as American. Twin-engine fighters, the kind his intelligence briefings had mentioned briefly. Slow, heavy, maybe reconnaissance aircraft or light bombers. Nothing a well-positioned Bf-109 needed to worry about. Stigler checked his lead. He had a 3,000-foot altitude advantage, perfect textbook position. He rolled into a shallow dive, building speed, ready for a quick, powerful strike that would scatter the enemy. But what happened next changed everything he thought he knew about air combat. The lead American plane, a Lockheed P-38 Lightning, didn't dodge, didn't turn, didn't dive to escape. Instead, it climbed, not slowly or struggling through the thin air, but at an angle so sharp it looked almost vertical. It rose at 300 feet per minute. Within 40 seconds, Stigler's advantage disappeared. In just 1 minute, the American was above him, flipping upside down and turning that unbelievable climb into a devastating dive with all the energy Stigler had believed was his alone. If you're enjoying this deep look into the story, hit the subscribe button and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. This is the story of how a revolutionary American aircraft design broke the Luftwaffe's basic beliefs about air combat, and how German pilots, among the most skilled in history, were forced to face a machine that seemed to defy every rule they'd ever learned. To understand what that August morning meant, we first need to understand the world Franz Stigler lived in. A world where German engineering superiority wasn't just propaganda, but everyday truth. On September 1, 1939, when German forces invaded Poland, the Luftwaffe had around 4,000 combat aircraft, including the Messerschmitt Bf-109E. The Emil variant marked the peak of nearly 10 years of focused innovation. Its Daimler-Benz DB601 engine generated 1,175 horsepower and could reach speeds up to 354 bpm. At low and medium altitudes, it could climb almost 3,000 feet per minute. Most importantly, it performed reliably. The Spanish Civil War had served as a testing ground where German engineers refined the design under real combat conditions. By the time the war reached Europe, Luftwaffe pilots were flying a mature, battle-proven aircraft backed by solid tactical doctrine. The results were clear and devastating. Poland fell in just 5 weeks. The Luftwaffe gained air superiority so total that German ground troops could operate almost without interference. France, despite having more tanks and a larger army than Germany, collapsed in 6 weeks, largely because the Luftwaffe destroyed communication lines, blocked reinforcements, and shattered the organization of French defenses, even against Britain's Royal Air Force. With its exceptional Supermarine Spitfire, German pilots held their ground. The Battle of Britain became a close contest, decided not by inferior technology, but by operational and strategic limitations. By 1941, the Luftwaffe had created a clear hierarchy of capability. The Bf-109 was now the standard by which every other fighter in the world was judged. When the Gustav model, the G-series, entered service in 1942, it brought small but important upgrades: more power, stronger weapons, and smoother aerodynamics. German pilots had every reason to be confident. They had fought the best aircraft Britain could field and lived to tell the tale. They had faced Soviet planes by the thousands and found them no match. When American aircraft started appearing, they seemed unimpressive. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk performed well enough at low altitudes, but became almost useless above 15,000 feet, where its Allison engine lost power badly. The Bell P-39 Airacobra, with its engine mounted behind the pilot, was an experimental design that often went into deadly spins, killing American pilots more than enemy fire did. These planes reached the Soviets through the Lend-Lease program, and Russian pilots quickly learned not to fight above mid-altitude. The Germans concluded that while the Americans had quantity, they lacked technical refinement. This belief spread beyond aircraft to their entire view of American industry and engineering philosophy. German design culture valued precision, refinement, and steady improvement of proven ideas. The Bf-109 went through dozens of carefully tuned variants. The Focke-Wulf FW-190, introduced in 1941, followed a parallel path, a radial engine fighter that complemented, rather than replaced, the Messerschmitt. Compared to that, American aircraft design looked messy and disorganized, full of competing models, company rivalries, and no single guiding doctrine. The Americans seemed to throw ideas at the wall just to see which ones worked. One of those ideas, first explored in 1937, was the P-38 Lightning. In June 1937, in Burbank, California, the U.S. Army Air Corps released Circular Proposal X-608, a request for a high-altitude interceptor. The requirements sounded almost impossible. Reach 20,000 feet in 6 minutes, hit 400 millimeter roof, carry heavy weapons, and still have enough fuel for long missions. Every major American aircraft company looked at the list and came to the same conclusion. It couldn't be done. The goals contradicted one another. High speed required a light frame and low drag. Long range demanded large fuel tanks, which meant more weight. Flying high needed turbochargers, adding more weight and complexity. Heavy weapons made things worse. You could meet 2 or 3 of these demands, but not all of them at once. At Lockheed's Burbank plant, a 33-year-old engineer named Clarence Leonard Kelly Johnson took a different approach. Known for his creative and unconventional thinking, Johnson didn't start by improving an existing fighter. Instead, he started from the requirements themselves and asked, what would an aircraft look like if it was built entirely to meet these exact needs? The answer was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. Johnson's idea was both simple and revolutionary. Use 2 engines. Not because twin-engine fighters were seen as better. In fact, most thought they were worse, but because 2 engines could solve multiple problems at once. Power. 2 Allison V1710 engines together produced 2,600 horsepower, later increased to 3,200 in upgraded versions, about twice what any single-engine fighter could deliver. Reliability. If one engine failed, the plane could still fly home safely. In single-engine aircraft, losing power over enemy territory usually meant capture or death. The twin-boom layout made the central fuselage available for fuel, weapons, and the pilot. All the guns, 4 50-caliber machine guns and 1 20mm cannon, were mounted in the nose, meaning their fire traveled straight and parallel, with no need to adjust for convergence or bullet paths. Each engine had its own General Electric turbocharger, allowing the aircraft to maintain full power even at high altitudes, a feat the Germans never managed in their fighters. However, this unique setup came with new challenges. The twin booms required twin vertical stabilizers, creating the Lightning's distinctive instantly recognizable shape. The forked tail gave the P-38 its distinctive shape and its German nickname. But that same twin-boom design created unusual aerodynamic challenges. The long distance between the engines and the central fuselage meant that if one engine failed, handling became tricky. Kelly Johnson's team spent 2 full years perfecting the design to solve these issues. On January 27, 1939, Lieutenant Ben Kelsey took the XP-38 point-to-point CAD-38 prototype on its first flight from Marchfield, California. The test lasted less than 30 minutes, but it was enough to show the aircraft's incredible potential. Kelsey reported that its handling was unlike anything he had ever flown. The twin engines gave it smooth, stable control, and the turbocharged Allisons delivered steady power without the rough vibration common in radial engines. Just 2 weeks later, Kelsey attempted a transcontinental speed record. He flew from California to Ohio in 7 hours and 2 minutes, an average of 350 mph, faster than most fighters' top speeds. But as he prepared to land at Wright Field, cold weather fuel issues caused both engines to fail. Kelsey crash-landed the prototype on a golf course, destroying the aircraft. What could have ended the project instead pushed it forward. The Army ordered 13 pre-production models for testing. The production version, now called the YP-38, began flight trials in 1940. Test pilots quickly realized this machine defied traditional fighter rules. It could reach 413 meters at 25,000 feet, climb at 300 feet per minute, and had a service ceiling of 39,000 feet. Even more impressive, it maintained its climb rate at high altitudes thanks to its turbochargers. However, the aircraft had serious issues. During high-speed dives, the P-38 encountered compressibility effects. Air moving at near supersonic speeds over the wings created shock waves that locked the controls. Several test pilots died trying to pull out of dives. The fix, hydraulic dive flaps, would only appear in later versions. The P-38 was also expensive, around $83,000 per unit, compared to $55,000 for the P-47 Thunderbolt. Its complexity made maintenance difficult, with crews needing to service 2 engines, 2 turbochargers, and double systems for nearly everything. Production moved slowly. When Pearl Harbor ended America's neutrality on December 7, 1941, the Army Air Forces had fewer than 100 P-38s, most of them still stateside for training. The first to see combat were sent to the Pacific, where they performed well against Japanese aircraft. The Lightning's speed and firepower gave U.S. pilots an edge over the agile but lightly armed Zeros. In the hands of aces like Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, it became a deadly tool. Still, the Pacific remained secondary to Europe. By 1943, the air war over Europe had reached a breaking point. The U.S. 8th Air Force was determined to prove its belief in daylight strategic bombing. The theory claimed that heavily armed bomber formations could fly deep into enemy territory in daylight, hit precise targets, and then fight their way back home without any fighter escort. But theory met harsh reality. The Luftwaffe had perfected its tactics for intercepting bombers with deadly efficiency. As soon as American formations entered German airspace, controllers directed fighter units to intercept. Bf-109s and FW-190s attacked in coordinated waves, exploiting the bombers' blind spots. Specially modified FW-190A Sturmbach fighters, known as Stormbirds, carried heavy armor and 30mm cannons. They closed in to near point-blank range, soaking up defensive fire before tearing B-17s apart with weapons designed to destroy tanks. The results were catastrophic. On August 17, 1943, the Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, the same day Franz Stiegler met the P-38. The 8th Air Force sent out 376 B-17s. 60 were shot down, and another 55 were damaged beyond repair. More than 600 American airmen were killed or captured. That was a loss rate of nearly 20%. At that pace, a bomber crew had less than a 1 in 3 chance of surviving the 25 missions required for a full tour. The core problem was range. Republic P-47. Thunderbolts could escort the bombers only as far as the German border before needing to turn back for fuel. The Royal Air Force's Spitfires had even shorter range. Once the bombers crossed into German territory, they were on their own, and the Luftwaffe was waiting. The 8th Air Force desperately needed a fighter that could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back. A fighter that could perform at 30,000 feet, outclimb German interceptors, and take away the altitude advantage they relied on. In August 1943, that aircraft finally arrived in England, the P-38H Lightning. This new version featured improved engines, better turbochargers, and the long-awaited dive flaps that solved its high-speed control problem. Operating with the 55th Fighter Group, it could fly over 575 miles with drop tanks, enough to reach Berlin. But range alone wasn't enough. It also had to win when the fight began. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe intelligence badly underestimated the new American fighter. They knew it had 2 engines, so they assumed it was heavy, around 7 tons compared to the Bf-109's 3. They believed twin-engine fighters were slower and less agile than single-engine designs, a rule proven by years of combat. And they knew that altitude advantage was everything. A lighter, single-engine fighter diving from above would always beat a heavier one climbing from below. All of those assumptions were reasonable. All were based on solid engineering logic and battlefield experience. And every single one of them was wrong. August 17, 1943. The Schweinfurt-Regensburg mission was about to prove it. One of the 8th Air Force's most ambitious operations so far, 210 T-30 B-17s, would strike the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt, while 146 more would hit the Messerschmitt works at Regensburg and then continue south to land in North Africa on a one-way shuttle. The plan relied on surprise and overwhelming force. It got neither. German radar picked up the formations gathering over England, and Luftwaffe controllers scrambled every available fighter. By the time the bombers crossed the Dutch coast, 300 German fighters were airborne and climbing to meet them. Franz Stigler's unit, Jagdgeschwader 27, launched from their base near Munich. Stigler was an experienced pilot, a veteran of North Africa and the Russian front, with 14 victories to his name. He knew his Bf-109 G6 inside out. The Daimler-Benz DB605 gave roughly 1,475 horsepower, delivering excellent climb at low and medium altitudes, strong acceleration, deadly 20mm cannon, and twin 13mm machine guns. He also knew its limits. Above 25,000 feet, the mechanically supercharged DB605 lost power, climb rate fell, and controls grew sluggish in thin air. Standard doctrine compensated for that. Gain height before the enemy arrived, then dive to attack, turning gravity-stored energy into speed. A lighter, single-engine fighter diving from above should defeat a heavier opponent every time. At 27,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Stigler spotted the tight bomber box already under attack by other Luftwaffe units. The B-17s held close, their overlapping defensive fire creating a lethal web. Then he saw the escorts, 4 twin-boom silhouettes climbing from below. Even at distance, the shape was unmistakable. P-38 Lightnings. Briefings had warned that twin engines meant a slower climb at altitude. Doctrine was clear. Attack from above with speed, make the pass, and use superior dive performance to escape. Stigler checked his position, 3,000 feet above the P-38s, the sun at his back. Textbook. He rolled into a shallow dive to build speed, pushing toward 400 millimeters. The Americans were at 24,000 feet and climbing, but not fast. In 30 seconds, he would be in range, except the Americans were not climbing slowly. The lead P-38, flown by First Lieutenant Virgil Smith of the 55th Fighter Group, saw Stigler's dive. Standard procedure would have been to break formation, dive away to gain speed, and try to outrun the attack. Smith did none of that. He pushed both throttles to war emergency power, 65 inches of manifold pressure, and answered the attack in a way Stiegler's doctrine did not expect. Together, the two engines produced 3,200 horsepower. The turbocharged Allisons didn't struggle for air at this height. They breathed as easily as at sea level. The P-38's nose lifted, not gently, not in a conserving turn, but in a near-vertical climb. Stiegler, already committed to his dive, watched in disbelief as the distance closed. 2,000 feet. The P-38 was climbing straight into his attack. It made no sense. The American should be on the defensive, dodging away, not coming up to meet him. 500 feet. Stiegler noticed something strange. His rate of closure was slowing. Impossible. He was diving, gaining speed. The P-38 was climbing, losing it. The gap should be closing faster, not slower. At 1,000 feet, the P-38 was still coming up. Now he could see the pilot's helmet, the twin booms, the forked tail. His gun sight locked center mass. Then, in just 10 seconds, the laws of flight as Stiegler understood them stopped applying. The P-38's climb didn't falter. At 25,000 feet, where Stiegler's Bf-109 could barely manage 2,000 feet per minute, the Lightning held a steady 3,300 feet per minute. Its turbocharged engines ignored the thin air completely. Stiegler pulled out of his dive at 26,000 feet, his speed advantage gone. He tried to climb after the American, but his supercharged engine was already losing power. The Bf-109's climb rate had dropped to maybe 1,500 feet per minute. The P-38 was already at 28,000 and still rising. 30 seconds later, Smith leveled off at 30,000 feet, rolled inverted, and dove. Now he had the altitude advantage. Now he had the energy. Stiegler's attack had become Smith's counterattack. Stiegler broke hard left, using his only remaining edge, the 109's tighter turn radius. The P-38 didn't follow. Chasing in a turn would cost too much speed. Instead, Smith zoomed back upward to reset for another strike. This was energy fighting at its purest. Climb, dive, extend, repeat. But it demanded immense power-to-weight strength, something single-engine fighters couldn't sustain above 25,000 feet. Their engines lost too much performance. The P-38, with its turbocharged Allisons, fought at 30,000 feet as easily as Stiegler's 109 did at 15,000. The dogfight lasted 6 minutes. Stiegler never found a clear shot. Each time he closed in, the Lightning either outclimbed him or sped away. Low on fuel and ammunition, Stiegler finally disengaged, diving away, using the one advantage he still had, superior dive speed, and returned to base. Behind him, Smith and his flight continued to guard the bombers. That evening, during Jagdgeschwader 27's debriefing, Stiegler tried to describe what had happened. "We had the position," he said. "We attacked from above, and they climbed through us." The intelligence officer took notes, his doubt clear on his face. Twin-engine fighters aren't supposed to outclimb Bf-109s at high altitude. Everyone knows this. It's basic physics. Yet Stiegler isn't the only one describing this strange new reality. Across the Luftwaffe, after-action reports from multiple units, fronts, and battles begin to show the same pattern. The wording changes, but the message doesn't. From Jagdgeschwader 2, engaged P-38s at 26,000 feet. Attempted attack from above. Enemy aircraft climbed to evade. Lost one fighter in follow-up engagement. From Jagdgeschwader 11, the American twin-engine fighter retains climb performance at altitudes where our aircraft lose effectiveness. Recommend avoiding combat above 25,000 feet unless numbers are overwhelmingly in our favor. From Jagdgeschwader 26, one of the Luftwaffe's elite units. The P-38 cannot be treated as a heavy fighter. Its climb rate and acceleration are equal to single-engine aircraft. Standard altitude tactics ineffective. These are not rookies making excuses. These are seasoned veterans with hundreds of hours in combat. Men who have fought Spitfires, P-47s, and every Soviet design in the sky. They know instinctively how air combat works, and they're all saying the same thing. The rules have changed. The psychological shock is enormous. For 4 years, Luftwaffe doctrine has rested on certain unshakable truths about energy and altitude. Get above your opponent, dive to attack, pull away, climb again, repeat. It works because every aircraft, German or Allied, follows the same physics. Climb rates drop with altitude, engines lose power, and everyone plays by the same limits. The P-38 breaks that pattern completely. It ignores those limits. For German pilots raised on the belief that superior engineering always wins, this isn't just a tactical setback. It's a blow to their entire worldview. If you're enjoying this story, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It helps us keep creating detailed historical content like this. The Luftwaffe's reaction to the P-38 shows how even the best organizations struggle when faced with sudden technological disruption. German engineers and commanders can't just dismiss these reports. Too many trusted pilots from too many respected squadrons are saying the same thing. But accepting their words means accepting something far more uncomfortable. That the very foundations of German fighter design might be wrong. In the 1940s, German engineering culture is built on precision, refinement, and steady evolution. The Daimler-Benz DB600 engine family evolves through careful, incremental upgrades. The Messerschmitt Bf109 goes through dozens of small improvements, each addressing one problem at a time. That method is perfect for polishing a proven concept, but it fails when the entire concept changes. The P-38 isn't an evolution of existing fighter thinking. It's a complete shift. A machine designed from the ground up around a new philosophy, built to solve problems that traditional designs never could. A long-range, high-altitude escort was a specific problem German designers never prioritized. The Luftwaffe simply never needed fighters to escort bombers into heavily defended enemy airspace. German intelligence tried to learn about the P-38 by studying captured examples and reconnaissance photos. Externally, it looked heavy, roughly 7 tons combat weight versus the Bf-109's 3 tons. What they could not see easily was the turbocharger system. Turbochargers themselves were not new. Using exhaust gas to spin a compressor and force more air into the engine was well understood. But making a reliable turbocharger for a fighter was hard. The turbo has to run at extreme temperatures, hold precise speeds, and work cleanly with engine controls. American firms, especially General Electric, had spent years making dependable turbo systems for aircraft. By 1943, the technology was mature. Each Allison V1710 on the P-38 had its own GE B-13 turbocharger mounted in the tail boom behind the engine. Placing it there, away from the cockpit and with the boom as a long exhaust duct, helped control heat. German attempts to copy this kept failing. The DB600 and Jumo 211 used mechanically driven superchargers, gear-driven compressors that did boost pressure but cost engine power and lost effectiveness high up. German turbocharger designs ran into overheating, control failures, and weight penalties. By 1944, a few high-altitude German interceptors like the Ta-152H got experimental turbos, but too late and too few to matter. The result? German fighters lived on one performance curve while the P-38 lived on another. Look at the numbers. A Bf-109 G6 at full military power climbs about 3,000 metern at sea level, drops to roughly 2,200 Fottimen at 15,000 F-Poig, about 1,500 Ftmen at 25,005 Fru, and below 1,000 Har Ftmen at 30,000 Har Ft. The P-38J, the main production Lightning, climbs about 3,300 Fmin at sea level, 3,000 F2 mean at 15,000 Ft, and still about 2,800 Fmin at 25,000 Ft. Its turbocharged engines keep near sea level power up to quad to $8,000. This is not a small edge. It is an overwhelming vertical advantage. German tactics tried to adapt. New orders went out. Avoid fighting P-38s above $25,000 FT unless you have overwhelming numbers. Do not attack from below. If attacked by P-38s, dive away. Don't try to climb. Only engage if you can keep equal altitude. These were defensive orders, a clear sign of change. The Luftwaffe, which had spent the first 3 years of the war controlling the skies and setting the terms of battle, was now reacting to American superiority. Pilots began creating their own coping tactics. Some simply refused to fight P-38s at all, focusing instead on bomber formations and avoiding the escorts. Others tried to draw the Lightnings into slow-speed turning fights, hoping to use the Bf-109's tighter turn radius to offset its power disadvantage. But these were desperate measures, not signs of dominance. The human impact of this technological shift showed in combat reports and pilot testimonies. Take the case of Lieutenant Herbert Huppertz of Jagdgeschwader 51. On March 11, 1944, his unit scrambled to intercept bombers heading toward Leipzig. He climbed to 28,000 feet, higher than his Bf-109 G-14 liked to fly, but necessary to gain altitude advantage over the escorts. Below him, he spotted 4 P-38s at 24,000 feet. Following doctrine, he dived to attack. A quick strike from above, then an extension away before they could react. The lead P-38 saw him coming. Its twin-boom shape was impossible to hide. Instead of diving, the American pulled into a climb. Huppertz was diving at 450 Meter. The Lightning shouldn't have been able to climb fast enough to avoid him, yet it did. The American converted forward momentum into a zoom climb, perfect energy management. By the time Huppertz pulled out of his dive at 26,000 feet, the P-38 was already at his level and turning in. Huppertz tried to regain altitude, but his Bf-109 was struggling. Even at full military power, its engine was producing maybe 1,000 horsepower, roughly 30% less than at sea level. The P-38's turbocharged Allisons, by contrast, still delivered full output. The American climbed effortlessly and lined up for a deflection shot. Huppertz realized he couldn't outclimb the Lightning, nor outrun it in level flight. His only chance was to dive, trading altitude for speed, and break contact. He escaped, but without firing a single shot. He had been forced out of the fight by an aircraft he was supposed to have the upper hand against. His after-action report read simply, "Encountered P-38 at high altitude. Unable to maintain engagement. Disengaged." Scenes like this played out dozens of times a day across Germany's defensive line. The strategic effects went far beyond individual duels. By late 1943, P-38s were escorting bomber formations deep into the Reich. The 8th Air Force's strategic bombing campaign, nearly abandoned after the WW2 devastating losses of August and October 1943, was reborn. With P-38 escorts, bomber loss rates dropped below 5%. In missions without escort, bomber losses still stay above 10%. But this isn't only about protecting bombers, it's about the Luftwaffe's limited capacity. Every encounter with P-38s drains German strength. Not always in aircraft destroyed, though the Lightning's heavy guns make it deadly in head-on passes, but in the constant cost of fuel burned, ammunition used, and lost opportunities. When German fighters have to focus on avoiding the P-38 escorts, they can't attack the bombers effectively. When they waste fuel climbing above 30,000 feet to gain altitude advantage, they shorten their patrol time. When they must disengage to avoid being outclimbed, they surrender control of the fight. The Luftwaffe is being dragged into a war of attrition it cannot win. Even with its industrial skill, Germany simply can't match American production. In 1944, German factories built around 40,000 aircraft of all kinds. The U.S. produced nearly 100,000. More serious still, the Luftwaffe was losing experienced pilots faster than it could replace them. A German pilot shot down over home territory. Even if he survived, often returned injured and out of action for months. An American pilot shot down over Germany was lost for good, captured or killed. But the United States had a far larger population and a massive training system to replace him. The numbers favored America completely. By early 1944, new Luftwaffe pilots averaged less than 150 flight hours before entering combat, down from 250 to 300 in 1940. American pilots, by contrast, trained for over 300 hours, including 50 to 70 in the exact model they'd fly in battle. Germany was now sending undertrained men in aging machines against skilled Americans flying superior aircraft. It was an equation that could only end one way. Meanwhile, American pilots learned to use the P-38's strengths to devastating effect. Major Richard Ira Bong, flying in the Pacific, developed tactics built around the Lightning's ability to manage vertical energy. When facing Japanese fighters, usually the Mitsubishi A6M-0, extremely agile but lightly built, Bong never tried to turn with them. The Zero could outturn any American plane at low and medium speeds. Instead, Bong used speed to stay out of reach, then converted that speed into a steep zoom climb. The Zero would try to follow. At 8,000 feet, it could still keep up, its light frame giving good lift. At 12,000 feet, it began to struggle. By 15,000 feet, it was on the edge of stalling, its wings shuddering in the thin air. The P-38, however, kept climbing hard, its turbocharged engines still at full strength. Bong would roll over the top, dive back down, and attack with gravity and 3,000 horsepower behind him. The Japanese pilot had no time to react. The fight ended in seconds. Bong used this vertical energy tactic to shoot down 40 enemy aircraft, becoming America's highest-scoring ace. He was killed in August 1945. Not in combat, but while testing a new jet plane. He was only 24 years old. In Europe, P-38 pilots developed different tactics for different German opponents. Against the Bf-109, they lured enemy pilots into climbing fights they could not win. Against the FW-190, which rolled and dived better than the Bf-109, they used the P-38's superior high-altitude performance, forcing battles above 25,000 feet, where the FW-190's BMW 801 radial engine lost much of its power. Many of the most effective P-38 pilots never became famous. They were men who understood energy management, who thought in 3 dimensions, using altitude, speed, and distance like tools. They knew how to play to the Lightning's strengths and avoid its weaknesses. The P-38 was not invincible. It was big and easy to spot. In a slow-speed turning fight, an expert German pilot in a Bf-109 or FW-190 could sometimes outmaneuver it. Its large frame made it easier to hit, but the twin engines gave it a crucial edge. It could often survive damage that would destroy a single-engine plane. Those weaknesses mattered less when the P-38 could choose when and how to fight. With its immense power and climb rate, it could escape most threats and re-engage on its own terms. By 1944, the German response focused more and more on avoiding dogfights with American escorts altogether. New tactical orders told pilots to attack bomber formations only when the escorts were away or out of position. That required precise timing and accurate intelligence on American flight paths, and it marked a major shift in mindset. The Luftwaffe, once built on an aggressive offensive doctrine, was now fighting defensively. Pilots were told to preserve their aircraft, avoid unnecessary risks, and retreat rather than push attacks too far. Strategically, this made sense. Germany could no longer afford the staggering losses of 1943, but it also signaled something deeper. The initiative now belonged to the Americans. A few German aces resisted this change. Pilots like Walter Nowotny and Heinz Baer kept fighting with relentless aggression, earning remarkable personal records. But they were exceptions. Their tactics, while successful for individuals, couldn't be scaled across an exhausted, shrinking fighter force. Nowotny, credited with 258 kills, was shot down and killed in November 1944 at just 23 years old. Baer, who survived with 220 victories, later admitted the air war was lost not because German pilots lacked courage or skill, but because they were outnumbered and flying outdated machines against an enemy with limitless production. The P-38 came to represent this larger truth. America's industrial and technical strength had reached a level where it could build aircraft that equaled or surpassed German designs, and do so in overwhelming quantities. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe's position was collapsing. The invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944, pushed Germany's resources to the breaking point. Luftwaffe fighter units were forced to split their attention between defending against relentless Allied bombing raids and supporting ground forces struggling to contain the invasion. P-38s, operating first from bases in England and later from captured airfields in France, now roamed freely across occupied Europe. They escorted bombers deep into eastern Germany, swept the skies clean of enemy fighters, and struck targets on the ground, strafing trains, vehicles, and airfields. The Lightning's power and long range made it unpredictable. A formation that looked like bomber escort one moment might suddenly dive off to destroy an airfield. A fighter patrol might cross paths with German planes climbing to attack an entirely different mission. Luftwaffe pilots learned to stay alert for that unmistakable twin-boom silhouette at all times. The Germans called it der Gabelschwanzteufel, the fork-tailed devil. The nickname carried both fear and respect. The Lightning was a devil because it seemed to appear everywhere, because it ignored the expected rules of air combat, and because it shattered old assumptions. American pilots loved the name. Many even painted devil emblems on their aircraft. They understood that when your enemy gives your weapon a mythic title, you've already won a psychological battle as important as any victory in the sky. In the war's final year, the Luftwaffe tried desperate technological measures to reverse its decline. The Messerschmitt Me 262, Chonor Sachenontointul, two-jet fighter capable of speeds near 550 km/h, entered service in July 1944. On paper, it should have rendered all piston aircraft obsolete, its speed allowing it to outrun or disengage from any Allied fighter. In reality, it was plagued with crippling issues. The Jumo 004 jet engines were unreliable, lasting only a few flight hours before needing replacement. The aircraft guzzled fuel so rapidly that pilots had mere minutes of combat time. To attack bombers, Me-262 pilots had to slow down, and that made them easy targets for Allied escorts. P-38 pilots quickly learned not to dogfight with the jets. Instead, they waited near airfields, striking the Me-262s during takeoff or landing, when they were slow and exposed. Dozens of German jets were destroyed this way. Like many of Germany's late-war technological projects, the jet program came too late and in too few numbers to change the outcome. Around 1,400 Donner's Me-262s were built, but fewer than 300 ever saw combat. Many were destroyed on the ground by Allied bombing or abandoned. When fuel supplies collapsed in early 1945, the P-38 Lightning kept flying right until the war's end in May 1945. Its legacy was enormous, more than 10,000 built in total, flying over 130,000 missions across every major theater of the war. More than 130,000 combat sorties were flown in Europe alone. Over 1,800 German aircraft were destroyed in air-to-air combat in the European theater. But numbers alone can't fully show the P-38's impact. The Lightning didn't just shoot down planes. It changed the entire nature of the air war. It gave American bombers the ability to strike deep into enemy territory and still survive. It forced the Luftwaffe into defensive tactics. It shattered long-held German beliefs about what was possible in fighter design. In the years after the war, surviving German pilots reflected on the shock of facing the P-38. Franz Stigler, the same pilot from our opening scene, immigrated to Canada after the war and became an aerospace engineer. In interviews late in life, he spoke openly about fighting American aircraft. "We were told that American fighters were inferior," he said in a 1991 interview, and for a time, that was true. The early planes, the P-39, the early P-40, were not competitive. But when the P-38 arrived, we realized American engineering had gone in a different direction. They didn't try to build a better Messerschmitt. They solved a completely different problem. And when we understood that, we also understood that we could not win. Stigler's words capture a larger truth about technology and warfare. Superiority depends on context. The Bf-109 was an exceptional fighter for the Luftwaffe's needs in 1939 and 1940. Short-range engagements over friendly or contested territory, where it could perform well at medium altitudes and return to base quickly. The P-38, on the other hand, was designed for an entirely different mission: long-range escort at high altitude over enemy territory. It traded some of the 109's advantages, like lighter weight and tighter turning, for endurance, power, and altitude performance. When these two aircraft met in battle, the question wasn't which was objectively better, but which was better suited to the conditions of the fight. At 30,000 feet over Germany, with bombers to protect, the P-38's strengths, range, twin-engine safety, heavy firepower, and turbocharged power mattered far more than agility. That's the essence of technological disruption. It changes which capabilities matter most. The P-38's reach extended well beyond Europe and the Pacific. In the Mediterranean theater, Lightning variants carried out high-altitude reconnaissance missions over heavily defended areas, using their speed and climb rate to escape interception. The photo recon version, designated F-5, carried no guns, only cameras mounted in its nose, and relied entirely on performance for survival. Its nose. These unarmed aircraft provided vital intelligence on German defenses, troop movements, and industrial targets. In North Africa, P-38s supported the Allied invasion and later campaigns, flying both escort and attack missions. The desert environment created unique problems. Sand and dust damaged engines, but the Lightning's twin-engine layout offered a safety margin no single-engine fighter could match. If one engine failed, a pilot could still make it home on the other. In the China-Burma-India theater, P-38s escorted transport planes over the Hump, the dangerous air route across the Himalayas that kept Chinese forces supplied after Japan cut off land access. Their high-altitude performance made them ideal for flying through the thin air above 20,000-foot mountain passes. Every theater of the war revealed a new side of the design's adaptability, but the core strengths never changed: power, range, altitude capability, and climb performance that few enemies could match. By the end of the war, the P-38 carried a complex reputation. In the Pacific, it was beloved, the aircraft of choice for America's top aces. In Europe, opinions were divided. Some pilots admired it, while others found it overly complicated, preferring the simpler P-47 Thunderbolt or the agile P-51 Mustang. The criticism wasn't unfounded. The P-38 required constant maintenance. Its turbochargers needed skilled mechanics, and in the freezing air over Europe, they sometimes iced up or refused to start. Pilots had to monitor two engines and twice as many instruments, demanding constant attention. Still, these were issues of complexity, not flaws in concept. For the mission it was built to perform: long range, high-altitude escort. Nothing matched it until the P-51D Mustang appeared in significant numbers by mid-1944. The Mustang eventually took over as the main escort fighter in Europe. It was cheaper, easier to maintain, and its Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine equaled the P-38's high-altitude power while giving it the lightness and agility of a single-engine design. Yet, the Mustang's success doesn't lessen what the Lightning achieved. The P-38 proved that true long-range escort was possible. It showed that turbocharger technology could work reliably in combat. It forced the Luftwaffe to rewrite its tactics and gave the Allies precious time to refine later designs. In technological competition, being first to solve the problem matters, even if later solutions are smoother. The P-38's influence carried on long after the war. Its designer, Kelly Johnson, went on to lead Lockheed's legendary Skunk Works, the top-secret division that would later create the U-2 spy plane, the SR-71 Blackbird, and many of the most advanced aircraft of the modern age. The F-117 stealth fighter. The design philosophy first, seen in the P-38, solving complex problems by challenging old assumptions, became the trademark of the Skunk Works. The turbocharger technology, refined in the P-38, also shaped post-war aviation. Modern turbofan engines trace their lineage to those early General Electric turbochargers, built on the same principle of exhaust-driven compression. The lessons in energy management learned by P-38 pilots influenced fighter tactics for generations. The idea of using vertical maneuvers to control engagement geometry, climbing, diving, and trading altitude for speed remains central to modern air combat. Today's fighter pilots train in tactics that Richard Bong or Virgil Smith would recognize instantly. Use your energy advantage, avoid your opponent's strengths, and control the vertical dimension. Yet perhaps the Lightning's greatest legacy is psychological, not mechanical. The P-38 proved that technological dominance is never permanent. It showed that assumptions built from past success can become weaknesses when the world changes, that progress often demands abandoning conventional wisdom entirely. For German pilots who faced the Lightning in WWII 1943 and 1944, the experience was deeply unsettling because it broke the rules they had lived by. They had built their entire understanding of air combat on predictable limits, on how engines, climb rates, and physics behaved. The P-38 ignored those limits. This is the story of technological disruption in every field. New capabilities make old expertise less valuable, new paradigms replace old certainties, and established institutions struggle to adapt. The Luftwaffe was not incompetent. Its pilots were brave, its leaders skilled, its aircraft well-designed for their missions, but it was built around assumptions that made sense in 1939 and no longer worked by 1943. Its rigid structure made change slow and costly. The U.S. Army Air Forces, by contrast, entered the war with fewer entrenched traditions and greater freedom to experiment. They could afford to take risks on radical designs like the P-38. When a concept failed, they moved on. When it succeeded, they built more. That willingness to fail, to innovate across multiple directions at once, proved just as valuable as any single piece of technology. Today, fewer than a dozen P-38 Lightnings remain airworthy. They appear at air shows, lovingly preserved by historians and collectors. When one takes off, the synchronized roar of its twin Allison engines and the elegant silhouette of its twin booms and forked tail stand out against the sky. Among the spectators, you can sometimes find elderly veterans, some who flew P-38s, others who once fought against them, all watching in silence as the fork-tailed devil flies once more against them. The veterans who flew the Lightning remember its complexity, its sheer power, and the confidence that came with knowing you could outclimb anything else in the sky. Those who faced it remember the frustration, the disbelief of watching their trusted tactics fail, the realization that the rules they had relied on no longer applied. Both sides remember an aircraft that changed air combat itself, one that challenged the very foundations of what pilots thought was possible. In the end, the The P-38's true legacy isn't measured in the number of enemy planes it downed or the missions it flew, but in the lesson it left behind, that when bold engineering meets vast industrial power, it can create machines that redefine the limits of imagination. The Lightning was proof that the impossible only stays impossible until someone builds it, until it appears above you, climbing at 300 feet per minute, breaking every rule you thought governed the sky. Thank you for watching. For more in-depth historical stories like this one, explore the other videos on your screen now.